Let's see, let me find this. Good to see all of you out there. And Jackie, can I get you to do me a big favor and just get a glass of water? Yeah. Thank you. So, we're in the book of Genesis, and have been. And there's Mike! Mike! Hi, Mike. Good to see you. And we're in the story of Abraham. And last week, Sue was talking about the beginnings of the story, the call of Abraham, and that he was called to Canaan, to the place where he needed to be. This is the title of this is just a little dig at Michael. Life wouldn't be complete without a dig, you know. They sing this song, you know, all I know is I'm not home yet, this is not where I belong, and I always just put in, this is just where I belong, because it's just where I belong. God's got me where He wants me right now. And so I'm going to talk a bit about that today, and about Abram being where God wanted him. So Abraham is called. And you know, we're all called at some point along the line. That little seed of faith gets implanted. At least it did in me. And I think many of us can remember perhaps the time that it happened. I remember, for me, it was a low point in my life, a really low point, when I didn't have a lot of other choices. God got me right where He wanted, by these short hairs back here, in His great grace. And I had to make a decision. And this was a particularly low point where, you know, my kids are sort of risk takers. I'm being as polite as I can be. Jenny's back there smiling. And she was exhibiting some fairly risky behavior. In fact, she was gone from our home, and we didn't know where she was. This wasn't the first time. And she was too young to be gone. And we always expected the worst. And I was laying in bed looking forward to yet another sleepless night. And it just suddenly came on me. This was time to let go, let God, get rid of my ego in this thing. And that was the beginning. I was unsaved at that time. But that was the beginning that He just planted that little seed, that seed of faith. And it started from there. It's 20 years ago. And it's been growing ever since, this calling. The first call, and then you know, I sort of see Canaan. This says callings and Canaans. It's meant to be plural. I think we all have our Canaans. These are the places that we're called to for our faith to grow. It's the place where God is present in our lives. He's active in our lives, and our faith grows. And sometimes we walk away from Canaan, and sometimes we come back again. And then, right now we're in this story of Abraham, and it lends itself to being a little bit disjoint. At least I'm saying that, half believing it. I was assigned certain chapters, and they sort of skip along. You notice it's 13 and 14, and then, Mike, this is not aimed at you. You don't have to. I'm just talking. I'm just talking. So it goes 13 and 14, and then it goes to 18 and 19. I'm trying to. Yeah, I've got the mic here. I'm going to smother you. You know. So it's and it skips a bunch of things, but it's the story of Lot, and we all have our lots in our lives. Some of us have lots of lots in our lives. You know, our lots are these people and circumstances that seem to continue on in our lives, and they're always there, you know, but they bring us to faith. Sometimes it's our children, sometimes it's our parents, sometimes it's no relation at all, and sometimes it's a circumstance that keeps reoccurring. But we have them, and they seem to me all directed at, in a sense, bringing me to my knees over and over. But I want to go back. Sue last week talked a bit about the calling of Abraham, and I just wanted to go back and go through that just briefly. That he is called, and like many of us, he's called at a time when I don't think he has a lot of choices. You know, he's 75 years old. He has no children. He has a name that means good father or almighty father, depending on how you want to translate it. I mean, his name must be an embarrassment to him because he has no children at 75. And his wife is just slightly younger. Sarai is slightly younger. And she seems incapable of having children also, at least without the divine intervention that we're going to hear about later. But he's a bit of a desperate man, I would think. And we don't know a lot about his religion. We know in Joshua, it says that they were in a pagan culture that worshipped many gods. And then there's some non-canonical literature, some non-biblical literature, like the Book of Jubilees, which is this sort of Jewish parallel commentary, if you like, on the book of Genesis. And there's some other books, and certainly the Koran. These books speak more of Abraham's youth. And you can kind of glean out that Abraham may have been a bit of a troublemaker in this pagan culture that he lived in, that he was in trouble sometimes, that he didn't see much use. And you can take these or leave them, but they're pretty good stories, I think. They're not in the Bible, but they're pretty good stories. And they make sense because he didn't like the idols. He thought they were useless. There's stories about the heads coming off and things like that, and him suggesting that maybe they could make a new head, and they don't. And his father Terah may well have been a priest of some kind, and it may well be, there is speculation anyway, that that's why they had to leave. Because this Abram was a troublemaker, and they had to leave Ur and go up to the northern part of the Fertile Crescent, up by where Syria is now. At any rate, I think he was probably glad to get out of both of those situations, because when God called him, God promised him that he would have descendants, and this sounded pretty good to him. And he also called him to Canaan and said, that this was going to be the place that he wanted him. And it was a single God talking in his head to him. For somebody who wasn't too enamored by all these gods, I think that was a calling that he was ready for. And so he and Lot is his nephew. So Lot is the closest thing he has to his son. And you get the feel as you read through these things, at least I do, that he's very attached to Lot. Lot's not a perfect kid, but he's very attached. It's about the closest thing he has to his son. And he loves Lot. And he takes him with him, and he takes Sarai, his wife, and his whole entourage, and all of his animals, and they head south to Canaan. And if you kind of picture the Fertile Crescent, it's this hump, and they're up at the top of it, and they're headed down along sort of the coast of the Mediterranean, and they get down there, and the Fertile Crescent kind of tapers down and then runs into the Sinai Desert. So it's not right down in Canaan, where it runs into the Sinai Desert. It's not a place where you expect it to be really dependable as far as weather. And he gets to Canaan, and guess what? There's Canaanites there. And the Canaanites are trying to survive too. And it's a hard place to survive. And they're not wild about new people coming in with lots of flocks. And it turns out that there is indeed a drought and a famine at that time. And so Abraham's first journey into the land into the place of Mike, it doesn't bother me. It's okay. Stay there. She's all right. All right. Anyway, he kind of comes down to Canaan and makes a hard right. It deflects off of it. I've done that many times when I've decided that where God wanted me wasn't where I wanted to be. And I don't judge Abraham for it. He had the choice of kind of starving to death and having the people that he was taking care of starve to death. And then he enters into this subterfuge that Sue talked about last week. And that is, he and Sarai cooked up this little lie for Pharaoh because he was sure that Pharaoh was going to be attracted to his wife Sarai. And they decided to be brother and sister instead of husband and wife, so that Pharaoh wouldn't kill Abram. And I'm not sure I wouldn't have done the same thing. I'm sure I agreed. Maybe Jackie would agree to such a thing. I don't know. But if, everybody seemed to be pretty agreeable. Let's save our lives. How can you judge somebody harshly who decides to save their life? And so they do. Things don't go particularly well there, not at least with the relationship with Pharaoh. But they leave, and they leave with a great deal of wealth, and back to Canaan, back to the place where their faith is to be, where it's to grow, where God wants them, where He wants to be present. And they end up in Canaan. And the Canaans of our life, of my life in particular, let me speak for myself, is a place where God, in His great grace, has given me tools, methods that I could grow my faith. One of them is all the people He's put in my life, all of you. People, many of them who have walked in shoes very close to mine. I believe those are the angels of my life. But those people have been put in my life for me to help me to grow in faith. And I believe when they come into my life, God sends them there. The wisdom that many of them have couldn't come from other places. And He's given me this church. He's given me the Word. And about 6 years ago, He gave me the Serenity Prayer. And the Serenity Prayer is something that every single day, almost every day, I turn to a part of it, to one stanza or another. And don't try to read it. Mike did a great job, but it looks a little, it should be in stanzas. So I'll just recite it for you. It's, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Many of us know that. This is the kernel for me, of what faith is. The serenity to accept what I can't change. There's so many things I can't change. There's so many things that I work so hard in my life to change, and they don't change at all. And that's a big piece of acceptance too. God doesn't stop me from stepping forward, from putting one foot in front of the next and saying, go on out. Take your step forward and try it. But so many times it doesn't change anything with all the energy I put into it. And so I begin to learn about some of the things that I can't change. Other people's attitudes a lot of times, or circumstances that crop up in my life over and over. The lots of my life. They're not going to be changed. The courage to change the things I can, so much that's of the time, that's up here. The courage to change my mind, to put a new equation in. Say, I've been doing this forever. The definition of insanity is if we keep doing the same thing over and over again, hoping for a different result. I don't get the different result, and pretty soon God says, it would be good if you looked at this a different way. And that takes great courage. It takes great courage for all of us to change the way we think, particularly when you're my age and you've thought this way for a long, long time. And the wisdom to know the difference, so much of that wisdom comes from the people in my life. I have so many good counselors in my life. And they are wise people. Abram is immediately confronted with an issue with Lot. But he's confronted with another issue too. And that is the one that we all have oftentimes, is we belong to our belongings. He's got so much stuff, so much livestock. Listen to this, Zach. Zach's growing his own herd right now. He can get too many. I don't want to go into great detail, but Zach was doing some artificial insemination yesterday when I got him on the phone. And, this raising cattle stuff is tough. But he's got all of they have all of these all of this livestock, and there's too much. This hilly area just to the west of the Dead Sea isn't a real wet place. So it won't support it. And Abraham is faced with a tough decision, one in which he's going to take a lot of courage. He can't change the weather patterns. He can't change the fact that there's not a lot of water and not a lot of feed there. And he has to change something else, and he has to change the equation. He has to realize that this young man that he has been with through thick and thin for a long, long time, is going to, they're going to have to part ways. He could have chosen a different thing. He could have chosen to just, he's the boss. Abram's the boss of all this. He could have gathered it all together and said, you're going to work for me, but he didn't do that. He gave them the great dignity, as we do with our children so often at the right time. We allow them to go out on their own. Not only did he allow Lot to go out on his own, he took the courageous move of saying, you pick, Lot. You pick where you're going to go. And Lot did. It says that Lot looked up and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan. So there, if you kind of picture, they're on the west side of the Dead Sea, between the Dead Sea and the Mediterranean. And Lot looks up to the east, and he saw that the whole plain of the Jordan was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt towards Zoar. And then parenthetically it says, that was before the Lord had destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Like, it wasn't going to be that good after a while. But he looks up, and I'm sure Abram has begun to understand that God's promises aren't just about abundant water. They're much more than that. But he lets him go. He lets him go into that land. And it's not good for God's people to move east. Whether it's Cain going to Nod east of Eden, or whether it's people moving to Babylon. Those aren't great places. And I'm sure Abram knows all that. He's a wise man. And he's getting wiser by the minute. He knows full well all that water didn't work out so well for him in Egypt, though it kept him alive. But I'm sure he has a desire to say to Lot, are you sure? Are you sure you want to do this? But he doesn't. At least it doesn't say he does. And he lets him go. He makes that courageous move. And then this great thing happens, that God says, okay, Abram, you've made this very tough decision in your life, and now I'm going to give you some rest. And this is the way Canaan is. We rest. He says, we rest, and then we have an event, and then we rest some more. He gives us the ability to recharge ourselves. And he says, I want you to lift up your eyes to Abram. The Lord says this. And look to the north, the south, the east, and the west, and all the land that you see I will give you and your offspring forever. I want you to enjoy it. I want you to live for today and look out there. And he says one more thing, what the Australians call a walkabout. I want you to take this walkabout. I want you to walk throughout the whole land, pack up your tents and go on this great camping trip and really enjoy what I've provided for you. God's really good in these lands of Canaan. And so Abram does that. And I don't know how long this walkabout lasts, but Lot's in trouble again fairly quickly, as lots of our lives are oftentimes. And without going into great detail, what happens is that the kings of the north, remember, Lot is living down within the plain cities. He's living near Sodom, or maybe in Sodom by now. And there's numerous plain cities. There's probably even more than 4 or 5. And the king of the north decides he's going to go down and sack these cities. And he teams up with the armies. He's this is the overking. I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name. It starts with an N and K and ends with an R. But he gets a large army together of all of the lands that he's king over, and he takes them down and he sacks the cities, and he captures and takes captive those people who live in the cities and all the booty that they have. He takes all of their wealth and he takes it up north again. And so Abraham is faced with the age-old problem that we're faced with the Lots in our lives again. What am I going to do? Am I going to save this kid? Every time they fall, am I going to save them? When are they going to grow up? When are they going to be responsible for themselves? I had coffee with a guy 2 weeks ago now. And he was telling me about, he has 2 sons. He's a little older than I am, and his kids are a little bit older than mine. They're in their 40s. And he has his older son who's had lots of trouble with addiction, just can't seem to make it. And he asked me to have coffee with him to talk about what I thought he ought to do, which I had no advice for him at all. But he said, My boy, he seems to have done only one thing in his life that he feels makes him worthy of anything, and that is to have 2 boys that he loves. And he's divorced. And he has some visitation rights with him. But those visitation rights are dependent upon him continuing to make child support payments. And if I don't give him money, he can't make it. He can't do it. He'll just live in his car, but he'll also lose his children. And what am I supposed to do about that? And he said, I have all these people around me telling me, that I should be exhibiting tough love. And I said, I've been there. I know exactly what you're talking about. And I had lots of people telling me I ought to exhibit tough love. And I did on occasion. But mostly I helped my kids when they were in trouble. And I'm not sorry for that. When people might even say, in fact, I was accused many times of enabling them in their risky behaviors. And I guess I did. But many times, like this guy, and I'm sure like Abram felt about Lot, his very life was threatened. This friend of mine, if his son can't see his children, he's probably going to kill himself. I mean, that's all he has to live for. What are you going to do? This is a God. This is a great God we have, a God of redemption. If he wants us to behave at all like him, we have to give people lots of chances. They need chances. And giving them money, giving them whatever help we can give them, it's not all bad. Depends on your motive. If you're just doing it for some codependent reason to make yourself feel better, it's probably not the best reason in the world, but I'll even buy that one at times for myself. Because I don't think that's what God doesn't hold those decisions against us. It's not about what we do. It's not about our performance. It's about our faith. It's about taking a step out there and saying, God, I'm going to take a step. I'm going to do it. Stop me if you can. But it's about talking to him. A friend of mine says, the book of Job, says the whole book of Job is, don't ignore me. God saying to Job, just don't ignore me. It's this sidling up next to God, to his warmth, to his love. I don't get it. I don't understand it all. But God, I'm just going to step out there. So Abraham does that. He steps out. He rescues Lot, brings him back. And all of the treasures that this king of the north has taken, brings them back, gives them back to the cities. And Lot moves right back into Sodom again. Everything's exactly as it was. But Lot's still alive. And maybe he wouldn't be. He may have died a slave. Who knows what would have happened. So Abram made a move of courage. I'm sure there were people pointing fingers at him, saying, how long are you going to rescue this kid? But he did it. And we never know. One of the things I'm having to come to grips with in my life more and more is I'm not meant to know. I spent my life in science. And there we try to understand things. And once we understand them well enough, we give them over to the engineers, and the engineers use them to tame nature. That's the way it goes. Zach's an engineer. God's not going to be tamed. He won't be tamed. I'm not going to understand God. That's trying to understand the non-understandable. And I've got to get over it. Because the reason I want to understand him is so I can avoid problems next time. If I really got God figured out, then I can sort of get in front of the curve. And that's not about to happen. So Lot's right back where he was before. He's living in Sodom. He's probably got all the same belongings because Abram brought them all back. He's probably got everything. Everything's exactly the same. Even after Abram raised this army, it didn't change. But he is alive. He's alive. And so we never know, do we? He's alive to go and have an incestuous relationship with his 2 daughters after Sodom and Gomorrah are stopped. And out of that relationship comes Moab. And Moab is the father of the Moabites, of which Ruth is a Moabitess, Ruth of the Bible. And she marries Boaz. And Boaz and Ruth together have a son, Obed. And Obed has Jesse. And Jesse has David, the line from which Christ comes. And there's that shadow, that foreshadowing of those of us who are not in the lineage of Abraham being grafted in, being blessed. All the peoples of the world will be blessed by Abraham. That couldn't happen if he didn't save Lot. He didn't have that in mind when he did it. But we don't know. We just never know. And so for me, that admission is huge. I don't get it, but I'm not intended to. Just need to be there, and he needs to be there, and he's there for me. So then, after he rescues him, I'm going to skip forward now to chapter 18. And we've skipped a lot here. We've skipped the birth of Ishmael. We've skipped the covenant of circumcision. We have skipped the change of name, Abram becoming Abraham, and Sarai becoming Sarah. But Kelly will cover that next week in totality. And now I'm going into chapter 18, which is I'm going to get into her bubble a little bit because she was supposed to have the first, but you can't just tell part of the story of chapter 18. So here we are. We find Abram enjoying the moment that he's living one day at a time. We find him, and it says he's sitting in the entrance of his tent. It's a great picture for me. My guess is the tent faces north so that there could be a shadow, and he's under the fly. And the clattering of dishes are back there. Sarah's in the tent, and it's a calm time. He's reclining in his Tommy Bahama chair, and he's got a cold one in the pocket on the side. And and he's just enjoying life. And out of the heat waves, did you ever see the movie? Probably some of you have seen the movie Pale Rider. Clint Eastwood comes out on his horse out of the heat waves. And I have this picture of these three men with somehow God in the middle of them, and Abraham recognizes that. And they come out into his tent. And he immediately grabs that moment. This is something I have to learn from Abram. I have to learn to live one moment at a time. I have to learn that during those quiet times, so many times, when I'm really enjoying things, when I'm really being full of gratitude for what God has, He'll come to me. He'll approach me with something. Because it may be that He's knocking all the time on the door. That's probably true, and it's just too thick to get in. But He gets to me at those times. And here He comes into Abram's life. These three men. And I was talking to Jackie about this last night. I get up really early in the morning. Usually I'm up at 4:30 or so. By 5 o'clock, I'm upstairs doing my meditation, my prayer life, and if I'm going to give a lesson, I'm sitting upstairs figuring out what I'm going to say. And it gives me a couple hours. And I'm sitting in the entrance to my tent. There's some sliding glass doors up there in the library, and they look out over a pond that we have, and the river flows past us, and I can see out over the pasture land, and then at least early in the year, a little bit earlier than it is now, that alpine glow starts coming up on the mountains. It's like Abraham looking north. It's beautiful to look at. There's great serenity there. And then someplace around 7 or 7:30, Jackie wakes up, and she and the dog come upstairs. And there have been times in the past where I really resented it, because she comes up and she kisses me good morning, and she tells me about a dream, or what she's going to do today. She asks, I'm being interrupted. And the dog, who's no longer a puppy, she's 50 pounds of dog, she still thinks she's a lap dog, she's up in my lap. All she wants to do is snuggle. These are the gifts of God, and I've more recently said, this is I got morning breath when Jackie comes and gives me a kiss in the morning. These are things that I should really appreciate. And the dog just wants the warmth, just wants to snuggle. So Abraham sees these people come and sort of interrupt his calm period, and what does he do? He goes into this wild white rabbit frenzy to take advantage of the moment. He says to Sarah in the tent, quick! There's all these verbs. Quick, he says, get the fine flour and knead it and bake some bread. Everything's fast. Then he ran to the herd and selected a choice and tender calf, and he gave it to the servant who hurried to prepare it. He's just grasping all of this, bringing it together. This is something that I'm learning in life. When God puts people in my life, I better know that they're there for a purpose, that they're there to tell me something, to give some of God's wisdom to me. They're channels, if you like, to use that word. And these three, and the presence of God there, Abraham learns yet once again, he's reminded, as all of us have to be off and on, that God is true to his promises. That he says, look, we're here to tell you that next year at this time, your son is going to be born. This will be a son born to you and Sarah. Not to Hagar, not to your wife's servant, but to her. That promise will be fulfilled by next year this time. Sarah laughs in disbelief. How many times have I laughed in disbelief when I've heard things of God? They are hard to believe at times. They're too good to be true. And then the three angels, emissaries of God, they leave and they go down to Sodom and Gomorrah and to the other plain cities, I suppose, to see if the amount of mischief there that God has heard about is as bad as he thinks. God stays present with Abraham. They're still sitting under a tree. It's the tree they've been sitting under. And they start to have this sort of prayerful discussion. Abraham starts to talk to God about the thing that I want to talk to him all the time about. Why so much suffering, God? How can that possibly be? With a completely good God who's omnipotent, how can there be bad? How can that happen? It's the age-old argument about the center of theodicy, of those arguments centered on theodicy. How can there be bad things? I mean, I really want to ask the question about what's going on in the Mideast. Life is so full of these difficult decisions that we have to make in life that have no good answers. How can that be? There are the easy decisions that we make, the ones where we call them quality. These are quality problems. Everything we do is just fine. And then there's these questions where, the right answer and the wrong answer, that's a slam dunk. We know it right away. I don't even remember those because they were so easy. It's the ones where there's no good answer. It's the one we invent sayings, caught between a rock and a hard place, or no good solution to this problem. There's so many of those where there's just not a good solution. And this is where Abram finds himself at this moment, which is, I don't get this. I don't get this. You're going to wipe out the whole city. And he starts off, like I always do, he starts off trying to understand God. Trying to understand, well, why are you doing this? How come? How come these bad things are happening? And so he thinks he's going to trap God. And he says, well, you wouldn't destroy these cities if there was 50 righteous people there, would you? God says, no, I wouldn't. And Abraham says, aha, now we've established the principle that good people don't die because of the acts of the wicked. And so now that we've established the principle, how about 40? Would you destroy the city if there were 40 righteous people? God says no. Gets him down to 30, and I can't remember exactly. There's a 25 or something in there someplace. But he finally gets him down to 10. And then this strange thing happens. Because, we all know he's really talking about Lot. He doesn't want Lot to be destroyed. Lot's in those cities. And there's really only 4 people involved with Lot. There's Lot. Lot is not a great missionary, it turns out. The cities of Sodom and Gomorrah haven't changed very much in Lot's tenure there. And so, but Abram doesn't get down to 4 people, to Lot, to his wife, and to his 2 daughters. It stops at 10. And then it says, and Lot got up and went back to his tent. The discussion wasn't over, but Lot just got up and went back. How many times do I now find myself there having these discussions with God, thinking, I'm getting there, and then realizing, no, I'm not. I didn't get the answer. I didn't get it. And I think Abraham just sort of gives up and says, and he goes back and sits back down in his chair in the entrance to his tent, says, I guess I'm just going to accept it. I guess I'm going to accept what happens. And we do know what happens, that God destroys the cities. But this is the hardship that leads to peace, that it talks about in the prayer. It's such a hardship, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace in the serenity prayer. It's so difficult for us to change our complete way of thinking, to change our minds, to say, wait a minute, I'm going to have to accept what's there. And then the serenity prayer goes on and says, taking as he did the sinful world as it is, not as I would have it. I want to understand it. I want to know what's going on. I want to know why my friends are suffering. I want to know why there's so much death in people that I know. It seems to be 1 or 2 a week. Not old people like me, people who are way too young to die. I want to know why that's going on. Accepting the sinful world as it is, just as he did, as Christ did, not as I would have it. So important for me. And I think Abram went off to his tent, saying, I think I'm going to accept it. Now, I'm taking a lot of liberties with Abram here, but he is, after all, the father of faiths, of all three of them, all three of the big faiths: ours, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. So I'm going to take that license. I learned that from a great teacher who's sitting back there with a green T-shirt. We get to say what we want while we're up here. I think he went back to the tent and he just sat there and said, I'm going to take it. I'm going to accept it. And here's the trouble I have. Sometimes I live with that for a little while and then I think, no, there's an answer. There's an answer. I'm just going to come with it up here. I'm going to figure it out myself. And I come up with these simple, stupid answers like, aha. Aha. They were all killed because of the homosexuality down there. That's it. That's it. And so what happens? The judgment glasses come on. I was raised in a church with judgment glasses. Each day before we came in, we put these glasses on to judge other people. We looked around to see how good we were and how much beneath they were. I'm going to throw those away. I've been throwing them away more and more, trampling them under my feet and putting the mercy glasses on. To blame things on great groups of people like homosexuals is just insanity on my part when I do that sort of thing. In my life, I don't know about you, but I know more and more homosexuals all the time because they're coming out of the closet. I may have known plenty before, but they never told me. But now they're out of the closet, and I find them to be just like me. And really, should I be trying to change them? Should I be trying to judge them? There's only one important question. Do you know Jesus? That's the only important question. The rest of it's up to God. So I need to stop with the judging. I don't have the answer. Why did 6 million Jews die in the Holocaust? Can I blame it on the Pharisees? I'm not about to do that. Why are thousands upon thousands of Christians dying in the Mideast right now? Why is that? I don't know. I just don't know. But this is where God's got me in my Canaan. No good answers, just like Abraham. No good answers, but take a step out there. Just a couple of weeks ago, I want to stay on this homosexual thing because I think the church has really not handled this very well. I had a friend of mine who I worked with for years, and he was a homosexual. He is a homosexual. He moved to LA and came back through town a couple of weeks back. Jackie doesn't know him very well. Maybe I think she met him at a company party or something one time. But he asked to come out to the house and talk to me about some things going on in his life. And we were sitting out there, he came down the driveway with this huge bouquet of flowers for somebody he doesn't even know and gave it to Jackie. I mean, he's just a human being. Turns out we really know his father very well. It doesn't turn out we've known that for years, but he's a guy with a father. He's like me. He's like all of us. So this idea of judging being the simple answer, I'll just judge them to be deserving of that. And then it flows over to the next worst thing is I start to judge myself. I start to say, I know why I've got this hangnail or whatever it is. I'm being punished. There aren't easy answers. But those are not the answers. He didn't come to condemn, he came to save. Those are not the answers. To see people through Christ's eyes is the answer for me. I can understand that much of it. So, we continue on here. I just wanted to bring up one other thing, which is just, I'm not saying enough biblical things here. I feel like, I'm a little bit guilty. I might be punished for that. In Job, out in 12, Job is just having a heck of a time, right, with these 3 judgmental characters in his life. And Job comes up with this great line that he says, men at ease have contempt for misfortune as the fate of those whose feet are slipping. What a great line that is. There's a lot of stuff in that. Terry's cocking her head like, what did that say? You know, when our lives are good, we're just bound and determined to look at other people whose lives aren't good. Let me just speak for myself, not for you. I'm hoping you do better than I do. I am bound and determined to look out there and say, well, they're not doing very well. They must be doing something wrong. They must be displeasing God. That must be the reason for it. This is a jeopardized world. And in a jeopardized world, malfunctions occur. And those malfunctions make bad things happen. That's just the way it is. They may have done nothing to deserve that. They probably did nothing. But that's God's grace. It brings us all to Him when we're on our knees about something. It doesn't have to do with the fact that they deserved what they got. That's not exactly what it says about Sodom and Gomorrah. It says they did, but it doesn't really make it clear why. It certainly is far more than the homosexuality that's mentioned, because it's just the men. It's just the men are involved in this. There's women, there's kids, there's unborn children. There's collateral damage. So we don't get it. Or I don't get it. Maybe some of you do. I don't understand it. But I don't have to. That's the good news. That's the good news. The Serenity Prayer closes with the 2 lines, that I might be reasonably happy in this life. You know, reasonable happiness is something that I could aspire to reasonable happiness. There's been a lot of times in my life I haven't even had reasonable happiness, but these days I have a fair bit of it. And I found one thing for sure is that certainly surrendering to His will, as it says in the prayer, is important. But even more important than that for me is to live in the moment. God meets me in the present. When I'm not living in the present, I'm living in the regrets and resentments of the past, or I'm living in the fears of the future. I'm living in those places where God forbid, I might make a bad decision. And what I'm learning is He doesn't care. He doesn't care about the bad decisions. That's not what this is all about. I'm going to make plenty of them. I'm limited in the information that I have. And in these choices, these multiple choices in which there just aren't very many good answers, I'll make bad decisions along the way. He doesn't judge me. He doesn't care about my performance. This is something that's really coming home to me more and more. My performance, what I do, what I don't do, that's not what's important. What's important is my faith. You know, speaking of Lot, I can't figure out, when I read this, I can't figure out why would he save Lot? The twerp? You know, I mean, the guy is trouble all the time. And he makes a lot of bad decisions. But you know, Peter in his second epistle says Lot was a righteous man. It's a little disagreement. Here, in Genesis, it says Lot was saved on Abraham's behalf. As though, you know, maybe he wouldn't be saved if it weren't for God having this wonderful relationship with Abraham. I don't know. I don't get it. But I don't have to. I don't have to. He doesn't judge me based on whether I get it or don't get it. He judges me based on my coming back to Him over and over again. Having that faith, the warmth, the love. Just, look, I'm just there. I'm just there. And by the way, I'm here now in my life, and then the last line of the Serenity Prayer is that I might be happy, that I'm happy with Him, supremely happy with Him forever. You know, God's promises, all the promises He's made me, and He's made many of them to me, I find them in here. He's told me He'll love me. He's told me He'll take care of me. He's told me that I'll live with Him forever, because He loves me that much. But the most important thing He tells me is, if I'll just believe, that'll be fine. If I'll believe in Him, if I'll have the faith, I don't need to make the perfect decision every time. I don't need to understand how to do that. I don't need to have the knowledge to do those things, because it's not what I do that saves me. It's His grace. Nothing I can do changes His grace for me and His love for me. You know, I could say more, but I think that's a really good place to stop. So you'd pray with me, and if the worship team would come up, then I'll stumble up there in just a minute. Lord,